This is Dr. Matt Lodder, Director of American Studies at the University of Essex and a historian of art and tattooing. Today we're showing him tattoos, characters and scenes from a selection of games, from GTA 5's Trevor, Hitman's Agent 47, as well as some more bizarre examples.
I know that they're pretty hot on historical accuracy as much as possible. There isn't really any evidence at all that the Vikings actually had tattoos.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. You can find more on Matt in the description, including his socials, as well as where to buy his book, Painted People. But without further ado, it's over to Dr. Lodder.
I'm not sure I like the look of this guy. Like that cut here, those kind of tattoos were like super trendy on skinhead kids in London in the 80s. Most tattooers, like certainly in London, like wouldn't do that kind of stuff. Like they wouldn't do that kind of public tattooing on people that didn't already have loads of tattoos. Of course, like as it got popular in the skinhead community, you could go to the guy or the couple of guys that would tattoo the cross on your forehead or the dotted line around your neck, and all the other tattooers in London were like, absolutely not, stay away from that stuff, bad news. We used to call it back in the day the MySpace bodysuit. If you've got tattoos that are only visible in your MySpace profile picture, like without having to go through the effort, time, money, pain, like of actually getting like sleeves or chest piece or legs tattooed or something, like just getting tattoos that make you look cool with the lowest possible effort. Yeah, maybe old Trevor here fits into that category. I definitely wouldn't say it to his face. But I don't know if Trevor's in a biker gang, right? I haven't played the game, but you know, tattoos have been associated with bikers since like at least the 60s, like Vietnam War. Like all these guys came back from World War II or from Vietnam, tattooed in the services, in the army or the navy or the air force, and basically after the war couldn't find work, hated the government, dropped out, joined these kind of outlaw biker gangs that made their money through criminal enterprise of various kinds. So this idea of like tattooing kind of separating you from polite society and being part of that biker lifestyle is part of that. But like, I mean, the other thing that like really goes hand in hand with tattooing and biker gangs is basically like they're quite useful for gangs all around the world for like money laundering, right? There's not a huge amount of connection between the amount of money a tattoo costs and the amount of money the raw materials for a tattoo cost. You know, you don't need X amount of ink to make a certain tattoo or whatever of a certain price. So really useful for money laundering. Certainly for a very long time, like one of the kind of upsides if you were a biker gang who owned a tattoo shop or a few tattoo shops, yeah, you could look cool and you know, tattoo your buddies, but it's also this nice little vehicle for a little bit of money laundering through the business. You find actually a lot of like prison tattooing, criminal tattooing, they'd be on the wrists or on the hands because they were a place where you could easily like tattoo yourself. This smiley face is upside down on his right hand, right? So that implies, I suppose, that he's tattooed it himself, because like if you can imagine, like you're holding it up and tattooing away, and that's the way up you do it. This actually looks like probably modeled off a real shop even, or like certainly the whoever like designed or laid out this set has been inside a tattoo shop, like books of Flash on the floor and those wallpaper hangers on those kind of clacky boards on the wall. I wouldn't be surprised if that was actually real Flash, or at least like, again, modeled off of real Flash designs, like Flash being the images that you can pick off of a wall. Whoever owns this tattoo shop's got here is like classic 90s, like mass produced cheap ass Flash, then like off to the forcible tattooing. Notice that like that tattoo machine hasn't actually got a clip cord attached to it, like the thing that actually powers it and makes it work. Like you can buy now these like wireless battery packs, but like this machine doesn't seem to have one of those attached. I mean, maybe he's just like using it as a punishment. Maybe he's just like grinding it into this guy's chest. Positive marks for the realism of the shop, not very many marks for the lack of realism for the doing of the tattoo.
What the hell? You are weak. Well, not all of you. The arm has been deadened to allow for the tattoo.
I'm pretty kind of like surprised in a way that this storyline persists in a like 21st century video game, because it's almost like one of the oldest stories that Europeans, Westerners told about getting tattooed in Polynesia, right? People think tattooing was discovered in the Pacific. It wasn't. There was lots of tattooing happening in Europe even before those encounters with places like Tahiti, Samoa, New Zealand. This idea of like tattooing and the exotic like really, really kicked in at the beginning of 19th century. Weirdly, it didn't have a huge amount of effect on what was happening in Europe. So European tattooing before and after the 1770s, which is when explorers like Captain Cook were exploring the Pacific, like European tattooing before and after that is basically unchanged. There's not very many sailors coming back home with traditional Samoan, Tahitian, Maori tattooing. The exceptions were transculturate, so people that basically kind of quote unquote went native, usually by deserting, running away from their post and deciding that they're going to have a better life living in a paradise island than being aboard a Royal Navy ship or whatever. There was a guy called Joseph Cabri around the same time who told the story of being like forcibly tattooed by Maori or by quote unquote savages. And like this became a bit of a trope, right? Like you could spin a bit of a tale about being captured by savages, captured by pygmies, like all these awful racialized language slurs. Even if it had been done in those cultural contexts, certainly wouldn't have been done forcibly on you, but it makes a good story. This idea of like white guy wakes up and sort of goes native by getting tattooed, which seems to be the plot of this game, like very weirdly regressive. Like, I mean, there's obviously a kind of positive version of it, which is like, cultural appreciation and respecting the culture in which one finds oneself. But that's very, very complicated. And I'm sort of surprised about how regressive this is. Clearly, like the tattoo designs here are referencing the kind of things that you might see in Samoa or in New Zealand or in other Polynesian cultures. So this is kind of a bit of a weird mashup going on here. Clearly, like this idea that getting tattooed is going to signify your development or your strength, like that is something that in particular cultures does happen in some senses. Like your tattoo will grow over time and it will reflect your life story and your life history. Again, unlikely to happen on a sort of white guy that's just arrived.
Once, long ago, there was a lotus pond filled with clean water.
And this story about origins I think is really interesting. There are stories, for example, in New Zealand that tattooing kind of comes from an underworld of a sort. Different cultures have different origin stories. Samoans actually say that tattooing was brought from Fiji. Yeah, this story of like the giant and the power and all that stuff like reflects some of those origin stories, but it seems to be one that's invented for the game. This guy's meant to be a clone, right? So the barcode, we're all a product, man. Like, we're all a part of the system. Pretty much as soon as barcodes are invented, people started getting barcode tattoos as a kind of cyberpunk, like, anti-capitalist kind of political statement. Although, for me, like, they lost all resonance when I was on a radio show asked to comment about people that were getting their, like, supermarket loyalty card barcodes tattooed on them.
That is P-Power. Real name, Paul Powers. Celebrity tattoo artist and reality TV star.
The designers have done a very good job of like dressing this guy as a celebrity tattooer. He does look like every contestant on Ink Master in the last 10 years, pretty much. The disguise has included fake tattoos, right? So I wonder if his customer's going to notice that this cool celebrity tattooer suddenly doesn't have any tattoos anymore. Seems like an oversight. Like maybe you could have at least got some of those kind of, stocking sleeves or something to really like pull the look off. Back in the early days of the professional era, like in the 1880s and stuff, there were definitely like world famous tattooers and kings, queens, aristocrats, like from America, from Russia, from Britain, like would pay for tattooers to come, like usually from Japan, actually. Yeah, this idea of like paying for a celebrity tattooer to come and tattoo you, like it feels pretty new, it feels pretty 21st century, but actually it has a kind of nice old history, I suppose. As in that previous clip, that tattoo machine is not plugged in. There is a foot switch there, but the machine isn't actually connected. Also, if you're getting a neck tattoo, just a little top tip, like don't leave your jacket on because you're going to get ink on your jacket. I mean, this guy's obviously richer than I am. Maybe he can afford to get ink all over the collar of his nice jacket.
Rico Delgado has been eliminated.
I checked to see if anyone had actually been murdered with a tattoo machine. Like, people have been obviously injured, you know, there's been like people charged for doing illegal tattooing and things, people have got infections, but I'm sure it's happened. I wouldn't be surprised, but like, yeah, I couldn't actually find any proof of this actually having happened.
From St. Louis, Missouri, weighing in at 245 pounds, Randy Orton.
This is super interesting. This case, like this video game, like sort of clarified a big issue that's been a real issue in like tattooing for a long time. And basically that's like, who owns the copyright of a tattoo? Like, is it the artist who did the tattoo? Is it the person on whose body the tattoo is? There have been a few cases over the years, like initially with adverts. So this guy, Rasheed Wallace, who was a basketball player sponsored by Nike, was in a Nike commercial, and in the ad, like, they animated his tattoo. The tattoo artist who did that basically said, like, hey, that's my art, I didn't give you permission to use it in this advert, and sued, and it settled out of court, like the Rodman case had done. There's another case, like famously with The Hangover Part 2, that movie, where one of the characters has that copy of like Mike Tyson's face tattoo done on him. And like the tattoo artist who did Tyson's tattoo also threatened to sue. And again, like settled out of court. And what happened in Orton's case is that, again, the tattoo artist said, like, you've used these tattoos in the game on Orton's character. It was particularly kind of complicated because game designers also included the tattoos in the builder character kind of feature. So you could basically have the tattoo as a separate thing from Orton's body and put it on your own created character. So it's sort of divorced, if you like, the likeness of Orton from the tattoo art. And the tattoo artist was awarded a judgment. Basically, the judge said, yep, you have copyright in this tattoo. So she won the case, although it didn't get a huge payout. But I think this is really going to affect how filmmakers, advertisers, merchandisers, and video game manufacturers are going to work with these things going forward. And it was slightly surprising because, like, the same game company had a similar case with tattoos on LeBron, but in that case, the judge in that case had basically ruled that LeBron's tattoos were not integral in the same way. It's a hugely weird and complicated area of law with lots of strange implications. This extra layer of, like, is it okay to tattoo a copyrighted image on you is also kind of a live issue right now. So I don't know, like, if you're a celebrity and you're likely to end up with your tattoos in a video game, like, if you're getting tattooed, make sure you're clearing it with your tattoo artist.
Hana wins. Tattoo.
Oh, I'm glad you put Tattoo Assassins in. Like, this is literally like the most 90s thing I've ever seen in my life. What didn't get released, right? So it was a arcade rip-off of Mortal Kombat, obviously. Yeah, I think it got leaked a few years ago, right? Like, there was a kind of basically playable ROM of a very late version of it online. The main bad guy has this kind of magical tattoo ink that's gonna give you power, and the tattoos you do with it come to life. I mean, just a sort of nice excuse to, like, well, have lots of characters in their underwear. This idea of, like, magic tattoo ink is pretty funny. When Japanese tattooers in the late 19th century started making a living tattooing foreigners, some tattooers would tell their customers that, yeah, this is like 1,000 or 2,000-year-old ink. It's like the only ink that I use for these authentic tattoos. Like, obvious nonsense, very, very silly, but makes a nice marketing twist if you're a tattooer who wants to kind of prey on people's, like, you know, Orientalist fantasies. How will I do if my tattoos came to life? Like, I'm a bit of a lover, not a fighter, so most of my tattoos are like flowers and things. So I don't think I'd put up much of a fight in this game. I don't fancy my chances against these people with, like, you know, venomous snakes and shit tattooed on them.
If you would ever like to get a new tattoo, you can come to me. Now, I'm open to inspiration as well, so feel free to bring any designs you find.
I've got friends who've been historical consultants on other episodes in this game series, right? And I know that they're pretty hot on historical accuracy as much as possible. As a professional historian, I'm quite happy about that. I get lots of students who are coming to study history because they've got into these games, so good for you. But there's a story that shortly before release of this Viking version, they were going to remove the tattoos because there wasn't, there isn't really any evidence at all that the Vikings actually had tattoos. Lots of Vikings in contemporary media have tattoos because we like the idea that it makes them fearsome and tough and badass and kind of different from Western Europeans and whatever. The actual historical evidence that Vikings had tattoos is actually pretty non-existent, if you ask me. The loophole, the kind of piece of evidence that they rely on to kind of claim that the Vikings had tattoos was basically a single story published in this 10th century tale written by an Arabic scholar, Ahmad ibn Fadlan. And Ibn Fadlan had this group of people that he called the Rus, which some modern historians think were Norsemen who'd headed into the north part of the what is modern day Russia. And he says, quote, "I've never seen bodies as nearly perfect as theirs. As tall as palm trees, fair and reddish, they wear neither tunics nor caftans. They carry axes, swords, and daggers, and always have them to hand. They use Frankish swords with broad, ridged blades." And then he says they were marked with designs of trees. Yeah, even in English, you can see that linguistic strangeness. Does they mean the swords, the axes, or does it mean the Vikings themselves? There's dispute over about whether these people were Vikings. So they may not have been Vikings. They may have been people from just from that area of what is today Russia. And actually, even if the marks were on the body and not on the swords, they may not have been tattoos. They may have been body painted. They may have been kind of war paint painted on for the purposes of battle and not actually permanently marked. I mean, okay, Assassin's Creed, I'll give you a pass here, but your evidence is pretty thin. These tattoos being on arms and backs, it's not 100% the case. For example, in the Arctic, in Inuit populations who have tattoos, people that are tattooed, they're women who are tattooed in particular, have tattoos on their faces and their hands because those are if we're thinking about these things as socially significant, they're the things that are visible in the kind of clothing you'd wear in cold climates. The other thing I guess that's worth talking about is this tattoo tool. You don't find these kind of long-handled tools that this guy is using here very much. You do find it in Japan. So that kind of long-handled tool is quite typical of Japanese tattooing. Most of the tattooing that we can determine, for example, from Russia, seems to have been done with single needle metal tools and not with these long-handled hafted tools of the kind that this guy is practicing with here. And practicing is also interesting, right? He seems to be practicing on maybe pig skin or some kind of material. No tattooer who was doing this kind of socially significant tattooing would practice like that, right? If you're going to kind of imagine a cultural tradition where tattooing is socially significant, there's something important about the act of doing the tattoo, and so practicing on pigskin would sort of be a bit superfluous. There was an artist actually, a guy called Wim Delavoye, this Belgian artist who tattooed pigs and then sold their tattooed skins as artworks. So it is something people are doing, and people still to this day actually tattoo their animals, brand their animals to mark their particular flock or herd or whatever from their neighbours. So tattooing of animals is something that we see and goes on to this day. But yeah, this whole thing is very odd, on so many levels. This idea of the tattooed Yakuza, obviously super classic. It's been a real trope of Japanese cinema. Really, it goes back to the 18th century, maybe slightly earlier, but tattooing as a practice, the insertion of ink in the skin, exists in Japan for a very, very long time, but it was traditionally used as punishment, basically, as a way to kind of stigmatize criminals, mark you out as an outsider. One of the theories of where this more artistic style comes from is they were then well, I'm tattooed already. And then they kind of reclaimed the practice, so to speak, to to turn it into something else, to turn it into something more beautiful and something more interesting. Tattooing became illegal in Japan as early as 1869. In fact, there had been some even earlier attempts to ban it, even before. After that, tattooing sort of goes really underground and therefore, again, drives it into the arms of these criminal societies. Tattooing and the Yakuza became really, really, really intertwined. Although these days, right, like actually as comes up in one of these clips, it's not that useful if you want to be a criminal and get away with your criminal activity to be marked out as a tattooed person. So the Yakuza, like the Russian mafia actually, are getting much less interested in tattooing. Like lots of hotels, beaches, bathhouses, they wanted to stop gangsters meeting in their premises. It was just too much hassle. And one of the ways you could do that, even if you caught a few unwittingly tattooed people in the process, was just to ban tattooed people from gathering in your premises. So even to this day, although it's decreasing, you find in Japan this possibility that if you've got tattoos at all, you're not going to be allowed to come into the premises, into the bathhouse, onto the beach. It's actually kind of nice that this game, which is really relying a lot on this kind of movie version of Yakuza life, is actually leaning into something that's happening legitimately in the cultures of the Yakuza right now. I do love how silly these are. It's nice that they are showing development. Like the early versions, he's got his carp isn't properly tattooed, like it's just the outline, and then later on he's had it more done. Like lots of traditional Japanese tattooing is done partly or entirely by hand, so it's very slow. And lots of the old masters, even back in the day, but certainly now, would only tattoo you for an hour a day. And so to get a huge back piece like that is a huge commitment. I mean, that's part of the mythology, part of the commitment, part of the bravery, part of the mythos of the whole thing, is that it takes you time to earn. So it's nice that they're showing that in this development of these characters. Because again, you don't want to be showing off that you're in the Yakuza. Like a lot of tattooing is not on hands, on neck, and even sometimes not below elbow, basically in places that are covered by traditional Japanese clothing. So you could wear a short sleeve jacket with an open front, and even if you've got tattoos here on your chest, it's not going to be visible. Mythologies and stories have come up about that, with like your soul not being able to leave your body unless you leave a gap. And then, for example, there are also stories about why you leave the gap in the armpit. It's because those traditional punishment tattoos would often be done in the armpit. And so if you wanted to show that you hadn't actually been a convicted criminal and covered up your tattoo on your armpit, you kept your armpits empty. Yeah, the other thing, of course, like of being able to be covered by clothing, of course, like one of the places these designs come from on these ruffians, on these ne'er-do-wells, I suppose, like they couldn't afford traditionally very nice, very fancy clothes, and so they would tattoo on them an equivalent, right? So the reason that these, it's speculated, I guess at least, that these tattoo designs like follow the line of clothing is that actually in some senses they're meant to resemble clothing, the kind of things that, you know, more wealthy merchants or whatever would have embroidered on their cloaks, embroidered on their jackets. You can't quite afford the designer gear, you'd get a kind of facsimile of it tattooed on you that you could show off while you were working with your shirt off, right? This interestingly goes both ways of being able to be covered by clothing, but also be able to kind of stand in for clothing historically. Like really super interesting connection. All those designs are like super, super classic, like right in the birth of Japanese tattoo culture, I suppose. The real like drive for this kind of stuff comes from this Chinese novel called Suidoken, the Water Margin. And like it features basically like these like badass like heroes, these like 108 heroes, like a character called the Tattooed Dragon, you got a character called the Tattooed Priest, a character called like White Fish, you've got others tattooed with like dragons, peonies, cherry blossoms, like all the kind of things that we're seeing. All of that romantic stuff like from the Suidoken like feeds into all this mythology of the Yakuza, this stuff that they really love, you know. I mean, these designs like really took hold after Kuniyoshi, the famous woodblock print artist, like basically just added some tattoos to more of the heroes. So yeah, Kuniyoshi did a whole series of like depictions of these Suidoken warriors as well. All of these like designs like really become like through the print series like again even more popular and even more kind of evocative of what it means to be a tattooed badass hero. So yeah, this interesting feedback loop between print sources and what's actually going on in tattooing, I think super cool.
Thank you so much for watching. Remember to comment below for what other games you'd like to see on the show, and be sure to subscribe for more content like this and beyond.